Thank you. That concludes general questions. Before we come to the next item of business, I think members would wish to know that I have written to the Speaker of the New Zealand Parliament on behalf of the Scottish Parliament to offer our sincere condolences to the people of New Zealand following the horrific earthquake in Christchurch. We come now to the next item of business, which is questions to the First Minister. Question number 1 is from Ian Gray.
To ask the First Minister what engagements he has planned for the rest of the day.
First Minister.
Mr Presiding Officer, to support your comments and note that the Grampian Fire and Rescue Team are in New Zealand at the present moment, and the Government has also offered the New Zealand Health Service any support that we can give the people of New Zealand at this extraordinarily difficult time. Measures to take forward the Government's programme for Scotland.
Ian Gray.
Presiding Officer, following yesterday's alarming incident in Auchinleck, does the First Minister agree with me that when airgun legislation is devolved to this Parliament, we should use that power to get airguns off our streets?
First Minister.
Yes, I do.
Ian Gray.
We do agree that we need tough action on airguns, the First Minister and I. Yet the toll of knife crime is even greater, and the power to act already lies with us. In 2008, I asked the First Minister to act, but he would not agree. In 2009, I asked him to act, but he would not agree. In 2010, I brought legislation on knife crime to this chamber, but the First Minister voted it down. Labour's knife crime petition has collected 30,000 signatures of support, and last weekend an Edinburgh mother collected 2,000 signatures on her petition in only 2 days. Why does the First Minister refuse to listen to these people?
First Minister.
When we discuss the issue of airguns and the hope that this Parliament can collectively act to meet a major danger in Scottish society, then I think we do ourselves credit because we act as a Parliament. In terms of the range of other justice messages and measures that have been taken by this Government and supported by other parties, shouldn't we start from the assumption that everybody in this Parliament wants to take action to make Scottish society safer? Yes. The measures that we've taken against knife crime don't mean that knife crime is not still a huge problem in Scottish society. It's the most enormous problem, as recent tragic incidents have illustrated. But it does mean that some of the actions that have been taken, both in terms of the specific action against knives themselves, in terms of the funding of the Violence Reduction Unit, have been showing benefits in terms of the recorded crime statistics. I welcome the fact that violent crime in Scotland is falling. And I hope that Ian Gray, in whatever disagreements he has over the direction of policy, will at least acknowledge that across this Parliament there is a determination of people to make Scotland safer.
Ian Gray.
Of course, and that is why in 2006 the Labour-led executive introduced the Violence Reduction Unit. That is why we increased the maximum sentence for knife crime. But to say that the violent crime statistics are less bad is not good enough, and it does not tell the whole story. In Lothian and Borders, for example, this Freedom of Information response tells us that last year knife crime increased by 22% in Lothian and Borders. And we do have to listen to those people telling us that they want more action. 2,000 people marched on the streets of Blantyre demanding action on knife crime. The murder of Raymond Gormley had shocked his community and appalled the country. Justice of the Peace Caroline Johnson has even stepped down from the bench to campaign for mandatory jail sentences for knife carrying. And although the First Minister talks of the action he takes, he has legislated to send fewer knife criminals to jail, not more. Surely that is wrong.
First Minister.
Well, I don't know if it's possible for a question not to be worthy of the questioner, but as Ian Gray very well knows, that serious crime should be met by serious sentences, not short sentences. And in dismissing the progress that's been made, can we just remind this entire chamber that the reduction in crimes for handling offensive weapons since 2006-07, since this government came to office, has been 30%. That's not a marginal decrease. That's a very substantial decrease in that serious crime across Scotland. Now, I think a range of measures have been taken, including the work of the Violence Reduction Unit, which this government has funded, incidentally, have been reason for that substantial reduction in crimes with offensive weapons. But if I was asked to point to the single most important reason, I would say it's the rate of detection. And the rate of detection is possible because we've got 1,000 more police in the streets of communities of Scotland. So before Ian Gray casts aspersions on any party or member in this Parliament about their dedication to keeping Scotland safe, to meeting and finding solutions so as we can minimise tragedies like the ones that have occurred in Scotland recently, then just reflect on the fact that if these police officers hadn't been patrolling the streets of Scotland, then I don't believe we would have the lowest level of recorded crime in this country for 32 years, and I don't believe we would have had that 30% reduction in crimes with those with offensive weapons. So let's just accept two things. One, that this Parliament as a whole wants to keep this society safe. And secondly, many of the measures supported by this Parliament, introduced by this government, have led to substantial improvements in the most serious crimes affecting the Scottish people.
Let us accept that last year there were still over 7,000 crimes of handling an offensive weapon. Almost 3,000 people were convicted for handling an offensive weapon, and 44% of murders in Scotland used a blade. That may be less, it is still far, far too many. And let us accept the fact that of those convicted of knife crime, 70% do not receive a jail sentence of any kind. This is a serious subject. Blantyre, Gorebridge, Trinent, Edinburgh, Glasgow. 5 young lives cut short. And that's just the past couple of weeks. 30,000 signatures on Labour's petition. 15,000 collected by the Greenock Telegraph. 10,000 more by the Paisley Daily Express. 2,000 last weekend by Tracy Smith in Edinburgh. All wanting knife criminals to go to jail. This party stands with them. Why does the First Minister insist on standing in their way?
First Minister.
Well, I've already pointed out to the Chamber the substantial reductions in recorded crime. I also should point out for the first time ever that the fear of crime in Scotland is falling. I think that speaks volumes for the effectiveness of the justice measures taken. I've pointed out that the substantial numbers of additional police officers across Scotland, not one of whom would have been delivered if we had had a Labour administration, because not one was pledged in the Labour manifesto. And of course one of these officers is Detective Chief and Superintendent John Carnahan, the person who devised and led the Violence Reduction Unit, which we both agree has been extremely successful. And John Carnahan said, quote, "I've been a cop for 34 years. If I thought locking people up for the first time they were carrying a knife and giving them 4 years in jail would work, I'd be your man. Jail doesn't work. We need early intervention, restricting access to alcohol and knives." Because, you see, when we talk about the blade and booze culture in Scotland, yes, of course, we all want to act against the blade culture, but only some of this Parliament were prepared to act against the booze culture.
Order. Question to Annabel. Question to Annabel Goldie.
To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Prime Minister.
First Minister.
I have no plans to meet the Prime Minister in the immediate future, but I did meet him last Monday in London.
Annabel Goldie.
Presiding Officer, everyone agrees that delayed discharge from hospital is bad for the patient, bad for the patient's family and bad for the hospital. And the goal is to ensure that where a patient needs ongoing care, no patient waits longer than 6 weeks to leave hospital and get that care. Now, credit where credit is due, in April of last year that goal was reached. But from January of last year to January of this year, the number of patients waiting more than 6 weeks has not just steadily increased, it has doubled. So why has the First Minister allowed that to happen?
First Minister.
Well, can I welcome Annabel Goldie's acknowledgement that while delayed discharges have not been totally eliminated, nonetheless they are running at far lower levels than any time previous in this Parliament. I note that Dr Richard Simpson said in the Parliament on 25th of June 2009 the reduction from 2,000 delayed discharges to zero is excellent. So at least some members in the Labour benches have been prepared to acknowledge that fact. We are working extremely hard to get back to a zero delayed discharge position because one delayed discharge across Scotland is one too many.
Annabel Goldie.
But, Presiding Officer, surely the goal should be no one waiting more than 6 weeks, any month, any quarter, any year. And the problem for the First Minister is, however you measure it, whether under 6 weeks or over 6 weeks, there are more patients being kept in hospital for longer. And these are people who don't want to be in hospital, don't need to be in hospital, and would make better progress out of hospital. And isn't it the case we need to change structure, we need to cut bureaucracy? But we also need the NHS to drive forward a new agenda. And surely the First Minister agrees that that is made possible by transferring budget from local government to the NHS so that the NHS is in control, ensuring that our patients get the care they need when they need it. Surely even the First Minister can see the sense in that.
First Minister.
Well, let me say that it's 168 patients, according to the last census, were delayed for longer than 6 weeks. That is 168 too many, even if it's lower than the many thousands who were in that position in previous administrations. But in terms of the action we have to take, can I point Annabel Goldie to two things? Firstly, issues such as this emphasise the critical importance of, even in these times of extraordinary pressure on public spending, to protect our National Health Service budget. That is a point of agreement, I think, between Annabel Goldie and myself, and this administration will continue to do that. And secondly, can I point her to the aim and emphasis in the agreement with local authorities on the £70 million change fund, which is going to help redesign services for older people. We have allocated £70 million for this coming year to be used by health and local authority partners, along with the voluntary and the third sector, to facilitate the service design to ensure older people remain independent in their own homes, focusing on reducing unnecessary hospital admissions and speeding up discharge after crisis. And I'm sure that Annabel Goldie will welcome that substantial initiative, even in times of extraordinary financial pressure, which is going to help address the very real problem of delayed discharge.
Question 3 from Tavish Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when he will next meet the Secretary of State for Scotland.
No plans in the near future.
Tavish Scott.
This morning's audit report on the First Minister's local police force says that Grampian Police has a track record of strong financial management and has reported efficiency savings in excess of targets. When are ministers planning to publish the costs involved in their national police force?
First Minister.
Very shortly indeed, and much of the discussion and debate around the Chief Constables and other interested parties in Scotland has been lively and informative. Can I say to Tavish Scott that there is, I think, widespread agreement that the changes in the structure of the police service offer grounds and hope for substantial efficiencies. And there is agreement, apart from Mike Rumbles, that changes in the structure of police forces offer substantial efficiencies. What I think those who are advocating such change have to demonstrate is that is entirely compatible with local accountability of our police service.
Tavish Scott.
Well, Presiding Officer, I'm not sure these figures are going to be available until Parliament ends, and if the First Minister can correct me, I'd be delighted to be so corrected. Why have ministers decided to make sure that they therefore never have to answer a question on their numbers because they've left it too late? Isn't he aware that the last time the government tried to take calculations to the National Policing Board, the numbers were thrown out by everyone from chief constables to local government? Doesn't the First Minister recognise that his national police force will cut local policing across Scotland, and all bar one of our chief constables are against it? Why doesn't the government want to spend money it doesn't have on a proposal that simply won't cut crime?
First Minister.
Well, most people are coming to this debate in the hope and expectation that we can find a more efficient way to run our police service that will allow, in times of great financial pressure, incidentally, which the Liberal Democrat Party must bear some responsibility for, and find ways to protect frontline policing and to continue the effective patrolling of our streets and communities, which has resulted in a substantial reduction in recorded crime over the last 4 years. So most people are approaching this debate with a view that organisational change may offer such efficiencies to enable us to police Scotland not just democratically and accountability, but efficiently as well. Tavish Scott seems to have made up his mind already that the present structure is the best of all structures for police in the best of all worlds. I think he is wrong about that, and I think whatever their positions in the evolving debate, most people participating in this debate will be trying to reconcile and find greater efficiencies which are going to be necessary given the financial pressure on public spending, and reconciling that with democratic accountability. And if we join the debate on that basis, then I am sure we will come to an effective conclusion. And I intend to be answering questions on that effective conclusion for some considerable time to come.
I will take a supplementary from Jamie Stone.
Presiding Officer William Skinner from the village of Inver in Easter Ross works in the oil sector. As I speak, he is alone, without communication, trapped in a flat in Tripoli, which, as we know, is a very dangerous place to be. His 3 workmates in the city are trying to get him out so he can be with them. Will the First Minister use whatever means at his disposal to get the Foreign and Commonwealth Office, or whoever, the Prime Minister even, to do something so that these people are brought home to safety without any further delay?
First Minister.
Yes, I will. Can I say to the Chamber, I hope to be able to say a bit more about this. Unfortunately, the United Kingdom Government decided that the Scottish Government would not be allowed to participate in a COBRA meeting this morning. I regret that decision because we have a substantial interest and duty of care to Scottish oil workers in Libya at the present moment. And as we have always done in COBRA meetings on whatever subject, we would have respected all confidences and gone into that meeting in as constructive a way as possible. I should argue for completeness and add that the Foreign Secretary has agreed to speak to me this afternoon, and I will relay the views of Jamie Stone and his concern for his constituents to the Foreign Secretary, as well as urging further effective action to secure the safety of Scottish citizens and indeed nationals of all countries in Libya at the present moment.
Another supplementary from Robert Brown.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. We are all anxious to see the success of the 2014 Glasgow Commonwealth Games, which will be a huge event for the city and the country. However, is the First Minister aware of reports that 46 milestones set by the organising committee may not have been met, with the completion date for the accommodation plan slipping by 9 months and still no agreement on the crucial broadcasting deal with the BBC? Can the First Minister confirm or deny these worrying reports? Is there slippage, and if so, why? And what reassurances can he give the Chamber that the Commonwealth Games project is indeed on track, as we all want to see it?
Minister.
See the report, and I saw Robert Brown's comments upon it. Can I assure Robert Brown that the organisation of the Glasgow Commonwealth Games, Scotland's Commonwealth Games in 2014, is on time, on budget. The organisation is proceeding according to plan. I did think the report, which I happened to read, was somewhat short on substantive detail. And if, as the report did, had to claim and cite as one of its major concerns was the Christmas party of the Commonwealth Games staff, then I thought it was lacking in some of the substantive issues which I might have expected from such an investigative report. I am happy to reassure the member that Glasgow's Commonwealth Games are on time, on budget, well organised, and with great cooperation between this government and Glasgow Council are going to be an enormous success for Glasgow and for Scotland.
Question 4, Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what action the Scottish Government is taking to support universities.
First Minister.
The Scottish Government has a proud record of achievement in higher education. Our financial commitments to universities next year will exceed £1.1 billion. That means we will have invested record amounts in further and higher education, more than £7 billion over the lifetime of this Parliament. And despite the cuts imposed on the Scottish Government budget by Westminster, we have secured agreement with the sector that will see the same number of university places available next year as there are this year. That is a substantial achievement and a tribute to both universities and the education sector.
Sandra White.
I thank the First Minister for his reply. The First Minister will be aware of proposals by Glasgow University to cut many courses, including foreign languages, adult learning courses and nursing. He will also be aware of the enormous opposition to these cuts from students and academics alike, including Mario Conte, the Archbishop of Glasgow, who has expressed concern that education could end up being confined to some particular and narrow end. Does the First Minister agree with me that universities have a duty to be all-inclusive and that these proposals will not only be detrimental to Glasgow University, but to Scotland as a whole?
First Minister.
Well, I entirely agree that universities have to be inclusive, and the contribution they make to our country, citizens and our regions is enormous. If they want to make changes to that provision, then they have to be open and transparent. It is essential they think of the breadth and depth of education and make sure that they honour historic commitments in that regard. Of course, it is the case that every public institution in Scotland, just about, with the exception of the health service, is undergoing a real terms reduction in public spending. It could not be otherwise, given the £1,300 million of revenue and capital cuts coming our way from the Westminster Government. However, Glasgow University seems to believe it is under more pressure than other institutions. Some of the opponents of the plans dispute that is the case. I think the openness and transparency and the regard and honouring of historic commitments is particularly important in the case of Glasgow University.
Pauline McNeill.
Presiding Officer, does the First Minister share my concerns at the proposed closure of the Department of Adult and Continuing Education at Glasgow University, which faces closure? Does the First Minister recognise that this department has been vital in widening access to Glasgow University, establishing links with the local community, and has in fact enhanced the reputation of Glasgow University and has ensured that individuals from all backgrounds get to university? Will the First Minister assure me today that he will use all his influence to ensure that this long-standing and valuable department continues to provide such an important role?
First Minister.
Well, yes, I agree with Paul McNeill, and the point that she makes and the example she cites is one of the historic commitments that I think are fundamentally important that I was referring to in my previous answer.
Elizabeth Smith.
Does the First Minister agree with University Scotland, with Lord Sutherland, with Sir Andrew Cuby, with a whole range of people in the sector and the Scottish Conservatives, that if we are to continue to have world-class universities, which we all want, there must be a graduate contribution?
First Minister.
No, I think we will proceed on the basis that the Education Secretary has set out, and that includes establishing what the financial challenge is for Scottish universities in the next term. And of course, the cross-party meeting on the 1st of March will be the next milestone in agreeing that process. Can I point this out to Elizabeth Smith that, of course, as I mentioned earlier, public institutions are under pressure across the range of public services. How could it be otherwise? But one thing we have already determined in this government, and one thing she should reflect on, that yes, there is huge funding pressure on our higher education sector this coming year. But as she will have seen from the plans outlined by John Swinney, this administration has no plans to withdraw wholesale from public funding of higher education, as the Chancellor of the Exchequer laid out in the plans at Westminster. And it is absolutely fundamental in terms of looking for the solution to the financial challenges, to have the realisation that whatever financial challenge has to be met in the examination on the 1st of March will give us a figure for which to work for. The fact that we, this administration, I hope this Parliament, are not going to withdraw from the funding of higher education wholesale is a substantial platform in which to find a distinctively Scottish solution that will leave us in a better position than our colleagues south of the border.
Question 5, Cathy Peaty.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister when the Scottish Government last met with Ineos and PetroChina.
First Minister.
Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Sustainable Growth met with Ineos representatives at the Grangemouth refinery on the 10th of January.
Cathy Peaty.
Thank you. Did you receive any assurances about the continuation of production and jobs? And when the Cabinet Secretary visited on the day of the announcement, why did he not take time to speak to the workforce? Does the First Minister share my concern that the major stakeholders in Grangemouth were not consulted? And can the First Minister tell me why he has not responded to a letter sent on the 4th of February from the Grangemouth workforce raising these concerns?
First Minister.
Well, firstly, I will be happy to meet the Grangemouth workforce, and I will return to that point in a second. But the assurances we received, and let me quote them exactly from Callum McLean, the CEO of Ineos Refining, a quote, "These agreements will help secure the long-term future of jobs and skills at Grangemouth and Lavera, in partnership with one of the world's largest energy companies. They present a clear opportunity for Ineos to progress its aim of forming strategic partnerships which help grow and strengthen its business. The agreements will provide further investment in our refineries, securing their competitiveness in European markets." Now, in terms of my involvement in the Grangemouth refinery, I have been very deeply involved, as I am sure Cathy Peaty will be first to acknowledge. I was deeply involved in 2008, where action by this government helped reconcile and settle the industrial dispute, which was passing a cloud over the future of the refinery. That was welcomed by both unions and management at Grangemouth, and was quite different from the advice I received from the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown, who told me not to interfere in such matters. Secondly, we were deeply involved and, of course, met the workforce in 2009, when the Scottish Government put forward a record RSA grant to support the key capital spending that was required to give the Grangemouth refinery a future. That was another direct involvement of this government in the future of Grangemouth refinery. So I will be delighted to respond to the letters from the workforce, and when I do so, I shall make sure that this government will continue to intervene wherever possible to protect jobs and livelihoods in Scotland, and will not go round the foolish road of the laissez-faire attitude that was advocated by the then Labour government.
Question 6, John Scott.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister what recent discussions the Scottish Government has had with energy companies regarding the development of wind turbines on Forestry Commission land.
First Minister.
Well, the Forestry Commission, of course, have completed a procurement exercise to identify companies to work in partnership with them. I think that is a very substantial exercise and offers huge opportunities to unlock Scotland's massive resource potential, both of further forestry and indeed of renewable energy.
John Scott.
I thank the First Minister for his answer. In light of the fact that over 24,000 hectares of productive forestry has been lost since 2005-06, you will understand why Confor and others have raised concerns about this type of development. Can the First Minister tell Parliament how many hectares of woodland will be felled due to the proposed energy developments, what impact this will have on timber production and downstream jobs, what effect this will have on carbon sequestration, and can he confirm whether the Government's tree planting targets will be met this year or indeed at any time in the foreseeable future, or will wind farm developments in our publicly owned forests further reduce our ability to produce much needed homegrown timber?
No is the answer to the last point. It will not reduce our ability to have homegrown timber. I am happy to confirm to John Scott that the Government's incredibly ambitious target of 100 million trees to be planted over a 5-year period is on target, is going to be achieved. Just for the benefit of members in the Chamber, that is 4 trees per person per year, and is a substantial world-beating target which will be achieved. And if I could just say to John Scott, is one of the ways we are achieving that is by mobilising the natural resources to generate the revenue from initiatives such as renewable energy in the forestry estate, which will not just create thousands of jobs in Scotland, will not just generate up to 2 gigawatts of power, but will generate revenue for the Forestry Commission, which will allow them to achieve their targets of planting the forests that Scotland will need.
Started a little late. I'll take a final supplementary from Lewis MacDonald.
Thank you very much. Large contracts go to large companies. Can the First Minister tell us whether the decision to award a small number of large contracts for renewable energy development in Scotland's forests was a decision taken by ministers or a decision taken by the Forestry Commission?
First Minister.
Well, all decisions are based on the procurement process, and that is evaluated by an independent consultant. But can I just point out to the member of the companies that he seems to be decrying? Scottish Power Renewables is based, of course, headquartered in Glasgow, 168 staff in Scotland, some of the 6,000 staff that Scottish Power have as a whole. Ecod Renewables has 31 staff in Scotland, offices, of course, in Lockerbie, and a new office in Inverness. Fred Olsen Renewables have appointed their sister company Natural Power, which is headquartered with 90 staff, 5 staff in Scotland, and PNE Wind UK also has staff members in Edinburgh. And in the previous round, for hydro energy, the contract was awarded to Green Highland Renewables, a small company with all its staff based in Perth. So I really don't think the member should allow himself to be misled by suggestions in some of the press that these companies are anything other than fantastic bona fide companies employed in useful activity with thousands of people working for them in Scotland. And if any of these workers are watching this broadcast, I am sure that the member wouldn't be wished to see himself casting aspersions on any of these excellent Scottish-based companies.
Point of order, Patrick Harvey.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I would like to raise a point of order under Rule 9C3, which governs the passage of hybrid bills through Parliament. Part of that rule requires that the financial memorandum accompanying such a bill sets out the best estimates of the administrative, compliance and other costs that the bill would give rise to, as well as timescales and an indication of margins of uncertainty. This week, the Finance Committee met in private to consider an additional liability which the Government has identified in relation to the Forth Road Bridge, the additional bridge they wish to build over the Forth. It now appears, though, from BP, the operators of the pipeline in question, that discussions have been ongoing with Transport Scotland regarding precisely this for months and well in advance of that bill being brought to Parliament. No opportunity was given for public scrutiny, either in the Hybrid Bill Committee or Finance or the Transport Committee at that time. Can I ask you to consider Rule 9.C.3 and ask whether it has been fully complied with in respect to that financial memorandum? And also, can I ask you to review Rule 15.1, which sets a presumption that committees should meet in public? Does there need to be clearer guidance for the basis on which private meetings can be held in order to avoid any assumption that there could be something as traditional as a good old-fashioned cover-up going on?
Well, I think, with respect to Mr Harvey, the two matters to which he refers are effectively a matter for the relevant committees involved, and that if he has concerns about the way they've conducted their business, they should be taken up with the convener of that committee. Further point of order, Patrick Harvey.
I'm sorry, Presiding Officer, but the point on meetings in private may be accurate, but the point on the passage of hybrid bills and the compliance that the Government may have taken forward on the financial memorandum of that bill, given that information that they had at the time about negotiations ongoing between Transport Scotland and BP were not included in the bill. Would you please review that rule and ask whether the hybrid bill in fact complied with that rule?
Well, the answer to that is no, because this is a matter in the first instance for the convener of the committee. If Mr Harvey has further concerns, then he should take it up with the convener, and if that doesn't satisfy him, he should write to me. I would suggest. I now suspend this sitting until 2:15.